Hi everyone, welcome to eShe TV. I'm your host Palak, and today we will be talking about how to work on your personal branding. And to do that, we have Lulu Raghavan with us. Lulu has recently launched her book Go Further Faster, a masterpiece that can help you chart out a clear and practical approach to your personal growth. Lulu is a brand evangelist and is best known for her role as the APAC president at Landor, a global brand and design consultant. Hi Lulu, it's great to have you on eShe TV. We are very excited to know about your book, about the journey. I have the book right here with me. Go further, faster, and I'm very excited to get into the insights of this. So, thank you for coming on the show. And why don't you start with telling us what prompted you, inspired you to write this book?
Firstly, Palak, lovely to meet you, and thank you so much for having me on eShe TV. Very excited that you've read the book. Actually, it was written for young people who are starting out in the world of work or who've just spent about the first 5 to 7 years and are starting to get ambitious for growth. I was doing many workshops on brand building, on personal branding, and many young women would come to me after the workshop and would ask if I could mentor them. Unfortunately, I have a pretty hectic job and I'm already part of several mentorship programs. And I felt really bad turning down people and saying no. After exciting them, after showcasing experience and practical tips, it pained me to say no. So I briefly flirted with the idea of even quitting my job and thinking, wow, look at all these customers that I could have. Maybe I should start a mentorship company or think about a platform to do mentorship at scale. But the truth is, I love my job. I love Landor, the company where I work, tremendously. I've spent the last 24 years of my career at Landor. And so that idea went away. But then I thought of a book and I said, what better way to pay it forward, to distill all my thoughts into a very clear blueprint, to share my experiences. So the next time somebody came to me, I could say, I'd love to mentor you, but why don't you read my book? And then we can have a couple of chats if there are any questions you have, or if you want me to go deeper on something, because I've actually shared it all to the extent that I could. That's the origin story of Go Further Faster.
So, what would you say would be the key takeaways for women leaders from, the reading, writing, and research that you ended up doing for the book? So, what is it like? Maybe like quick five or six, like six key takeaways.
Great question. Number one, self belief. I talk about that quite a bit in the book. You've got to believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, no one else is going to believe in you. And so, as women, we have a lot of foundational work to do to build up that self esteem and that confidence in ourselves, because I feel that that's the foundation for growth. The second, related to the first, is that we have to recognize that while there are many external barriers, the workplace may not be so friendly, the family may not be supportive, the bigger barriers are also mental. So, therefore, truly understanding what our own internal barriers to success are is hugely important. The third, important for women to know that they can't just sit in a corner and do great work and expect their work to be recognized, for them to be valued, and for them to go up the ladder or get new opportunities in an organization. They have to work hard to create visibility for themselves in the organization, in the industry at large. Super important. I also want women to know that skills are not developed overnight. It takes time. I'm a huge fan of the compound interest concept, where something that you do every day accumulates over time, and suddenly 3 years later, 5 years later, You have so much experience because you've been doing something, either reading or learning a new skill, practicing a new habit, and then you're suddenly an expert. But it takes time to build on that. I also believe that you have to be a fearless advocate, not just for yourself, but for others in the workplace, which is why I talk a lot about helping others rise as a women leader. The best way, the shortcut, Palak, for rising is to shine the spotlight on others and make them rise. And I would also say that you shouldn't see success as a destination that has to be reached, but a journey that you're on, and you have to constantly evolve and grow and give back. So I would say those are some of the top takeaways from my book. But as you said, the book is structured in a very simple way. A lot of readers have appreciated the structure, where part one is about the foundation, what you need to do from a mind, body, soul perspective, and all of the practices to cultivate. Part two is about developing your personal brand, how you package the value that you bring to your workplace or to your organization. And then the third part is to keep growing and evolving. And then you would have seen right at the end, there is a section on handy how to's. So, how to ask for a raise, how to push back or say no, how to build a tribe. For the younger audiences who may not be that much into reading, I wanted to have a few things that they can dip into and take some practical tips right away. And I've also peppered the book with voices of other women leaders. And so hopefully that makes it a little bit more engaging when others are also saying the same thing.
But I want to go back to the point where you said spotlight on others, helping others, and kind of, shine light on them. And that kind
Mm.
of propels you in your journey. And in your book, I think you have followed your own advice really well by, like, highlighting so many of these authors, getting all of these insights. And as you rightly said, like, people who are not so much into reading, and if you end up reading this book, you have, like, you have the insights from so many other books. So why don't you talk about, like, maybe three of your favorite books or insights that you would want to, like, kind of highlight, that we can learn from.
Wow, long list of books, but let me see which ones I think would be most useful. So one of my all-time favorites is Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. I like that book so much because it truly inspires every individual to break free of inhibitions to make a contribution to the world. It could be through art, it could be through writing, it could be through creating a new company. But we are all so scared of putting ourselves out there because either we think we're not good enough or our work is not good enough. We are scared of criticism. So, Elizabeth Gilbert's book really helps you to overcome those barriers. That's the first book, I would say. The second one is Atomic Habits. That by James Clear is an excellent book. You can learn so much. I mean, it's a bestseller, so I don't need to endorse it. The whole world has endorsed it. But what I like about James's book is it's not just one thing that you do, Palak, but if there are 6, 7, 10 different things that you do and you do a little bit every day, suddenly success is bound to happen. He talks about the British cycling team that hadn't won any medals for a long period of time. And then he made a ton of adjustments to how these guys go to race. You know, everything from the size at which the seat is put, to the heating, to the clothes that they wear, to the nutrition that they take. And all of these changes started improving their performance. And before you know it, they were winning Olympic golds. It's a very, very motivating story. The third book I would recommend is one that I have recently discovered. It's by Adam Bryant called Leap to Leader. And I believe it's the perfect companion on your leadership journey. Adam talks a lot about the most important skills that professionals need to have when they evolve from being an individual contributor to a manager to a leader. And there's a lot of wealth and insights in that book. So those would be my top three. As you know, there are many more in the book. And in fact, somebody was telling me that they just made a list of all of the books and they've ordered every one of them, which was quite amusing and touching to hear.
No, absolutely. I have marked all of these books in your book, and I'm going to go to it one by one. But thank you for sharing those insights. And I think going from here to, like, you were talking about putting yourself out there, like, with Big Magic, as you mentioned. And what advice do you have then for young women who are looking for mentorship? What are some of the practical tips, for them to kind of promote themselves, to build a better network for themselves?
The first thing is actually to look inside. What is it that you're really good at, and what is it that you want to be known for? So, Palak, it's easy to start a social media page or to start sharing on LinkedIn. It's more difficult to have that self awareness to understand what is my X factor? What is it that I'm really, really good at? So, if you're a writer, are you the writer who has the best insights? Are you the writer who's most vivid in her descriptions, right? Are you the writer that truly brings a smile to the reader's face? What kind of writer are you? And how is that different from all of the other writers out there? Once you discover that special difference, you then have to think about how you communicate that. Do you have a blog? Do you build a website? Do you start a podcast? Or do you just share articles? Thinking about how you're going to communicate your expertise is important. And then the third piece is consistency. Once you start, you have to keep doing it and be at it. A good example is somebody from our advertising industry, a gentleman called Shumanto Chattopadhyay. He started a website, a YouTube channel called The English Nut. Now, he's a creative director and he's an expert in copy. So, how is he going to signal this expertise in copy? He started looking at the quirks and the oddities of the English language and started recording clips. And slowly, he built up this expertise. He even got to interview Ruskin Bond at one point in time because he's built up this repertoire and built up, so much content on being the person who looks at the oddities of the English language. So, how might you choose something and then be consistent in creating content and putting your views out to establish authority? It's not just about screaming on LinkedIn about your awards and everything else that you've done. You have to add value to people's lives. So, how are you, as a writer, as a consultant, as a financial advisor, what's your take on adding unique value to others?
Maybe you could talk a little bit about the barriers that also you, like, you've spoken about in the book, because is there a need for personal branding? And we all have these kind of inhibitions. Maybe it is for celebrities, maybe it's for influencers. If you could go a little bit more about, like, top tips for personal branding and why, and also a little bit more about expanding your network, like how do you go about that?
Okay, so we'll start with personal branding. Going back to Adam Bryant, who I referenced in Leap to Leader, he talks about how it's important to be a workhorse, to deliver, but it's also important to be a show pony. But you can't just be a show pony, all about the shusha. It needs to be a good combination of the two. It's the people who are both workhorses and show ponies that are most successful in an organization or in life. That's the starting point, right? So you've got to be visible, you've got to showcase your achievements, you can't just deliver. That's the first point. Second, you have to take credit for the contributions that you make without being shy. A lot of women are very shy to talk about their work, to talk about what they did or what they achieved. If you have those inhibitions, I recommend Google's program, hashtag I am remarkable, which encourages women to truly see their worth and to talk about it. Anybody who's going through that has gone through that program immediately gets over the barriers. So those are extremely important. And then, of course, there's a whole process, Palak, of how you build your brand, which I've gone into in the book with the 5 Ds, where you discover your X factor, you define it, you design the expression of it, you deploy your personal branding assets, and then you deliver day in and day out. The piece of it which you're asking about, which is network. Relationships, I think, are the absolute currency of being successful. Dale Carnegie wrote about it many, many moons ago with his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think it's the most important skill that any young woman, any professional, frankly, should have. And that actually requires you to invest in every relationship, everybody that you meet. So, for example, Palak, I've met you now and we're going to be connected. Am I going to take the trouble to see if you're on LinkedIn or on Instagram, or I exchange numbers with you and say, hey, Palak, it was really lovely. Let's stay in touch. Maybe 3 months later, I see an article in some other magazine which is interesting and I share it with you. And I slowly build that relationship. I don't have to go to a networking event to meet a Palak, but every day we come across people. We just have to have a system for making a warm connection, for having an exchange, and slowly, slowly building up your network. That's how I did it over years and years. And then the magic of compounding takes over, and suddenly people feel like, oh my God, you have the most amazing network, people everywhere. But it didn't develop by going to parties or going to conferences and taking cards, which is what people think networking is about. It is investing in every new person that you meet and having a system to systematically nurture those connections.
Wow, wonderful for putting it in that way. I think sometimes we do end up making that genuine effort. Sometimes we don't, and are scared of, like, something networking. Like, you have to do and kind of do small talk, and that's not what it is about. It is about building relationships, as you've mentioned, adding value to others as well. And I think going a little bit forward in the same direction, I would just go on to, like, you talk a lot about authenticity, vulnerability, and if you could talk a little bit about how do you stay authentic, and and not be too vulnerable. Is that a thing, or how do you kind of, like, and in the corporate setup, how does this work? um
It's a very tricky question, and authenticity comes with confidence. I think when you're young and you're joining the workplace, and I certainly was like that, you always want to impress others. And when you want to impress others, you may have a mask, or you may say things, or you may dress a certain way to please others or to fit in, so to speak. But actually, that's a bit of a short term, short sighted strategy. I believe that in the workplace, ultimately the truth comes out in terms of who you are, what's your personality, and how you interact with others. So, a better strategy is to truly be who you are, to embrace all your strengths as well as your flaws, to show up in a way that's most natural to you, and not try to build an image that's not consistent with who you are. So, if you're not an extroverted person, don't try to be extroverted. Maybe you're in meetings and you're introverted, but find the right way to create an impact, right? You have to be true as a leader. Don't feel like, leaders are bossy and alpha male. As a woman who's just been promoted into a leadership position, I need to be that way. Embrace your natural style, follow that, and be also ready for both praises as well as criticism. Authenticity comes with criticism, because if you're authentic, you may say, I don't like that, or I disagree, or we shouldn't be talking about somebody else when they're not in the room, or that's not nice. We shouldn't have brought that person down. And then people will not like what you've said because you're calling out a truth. You have to have the courage then to stay with what you've said. But at the end of the day, authentic people are the most liked people in many ways. People get attracted to them because there's something very raw, something very real about them, and they speak the truth. Coming to vulnerability, sometimes there's a perfect world that we live in, especially social media. And it almost seems too good to be true, where people have perfect lives and, perfect families and perfect relationships. And it all seems a bit fake. Even in the world of brands, when things are too polished, it comes across as not so interesting, a bit bland, or a bit boring. Also, when companies try to stay on message but are not reacting to mistakes that they've made or authentically dealing with crises, that can also backfire. Therefore, we've seen in the last 4 5 years vulnerability has become something that's very attractive because the person who speaks the truth, is transparent, or apologizes is refreshingly different from how things used to be, at least in the corporate world. And therefore, in my book, I talk about how it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say you don't know, or as a leader, I made a mistake, because that allows younger people, others in the organization, to also know that you're not perfect, and we all have our strengths and we all have areas of growth. And so I do believe, Palak, that authenticity and vulnerability are traits that are not that common, but in the world that we live in this fake world, by embracing those two, you have a better chance at a genuine connection and of standing out.
No, absolutely. I think this advice makes a lot of sense, and I think we are probably gradually moving towards, like, where we are not just talking about our resumes but also our failure CVs is a thing right now, and that leads to my next question that I wanted to ask you about, and which is my favorite question to ask anybody who I'm interviewing. That how do you deal with failure? How do you deal with rejection? How do you, like, deal with the setback? And I think you have mentioned an incident or two in your book, and if you could talk a little bit more about it, or any other incident as well, but just to address this part.
Such an important question. We live in an achievement oriented society where success is everything. The narrative is changing, but more often than not, people don't like to talk about failures. I mean, let's all admit it. It's not nice. We were beaten up when we were younger if we failed. Our upbringing did not encourage us to embrace failure. But I do believe that in order to grow, you have to be open to feedback, to criticism, and even rejection. Because going back to what I said, we're all not perfect and we can all make mistakes. I used to deal with it very badly, Palak. My body would react. I would have a physical reaction when feedback was negative. I would, become small. It's almost like I would diminish myself. I felt like my self worth was being attacked. I was not so mature. In the creative world, it's really important to embrace feedback because, we're talking about work and there will be feedback on work. As a writer, I'm sure your editor has marked up lots of red everywhere, and you probably took a while to get used to it. And those who embrace it soonest grow the most. It was when one of the incidents that I talked about, I got rejected, I got booted off a project, and I was so sad and so upset, and I moaned and moaned and moaned about it. I had difficulty waking up and going to the office every day because I felt that I had been rejected. My husband gave me a talking down to and said, you know what, you need to get over this. You need to wake up, you need to show up, and you need to get going to the next thing. You're lucky that you had such a big rejection so late in your career. Actually, not lucky. You should have had it earlier because then you would have been whipped into shape and taken it as part of your stride. But it's okay. Now you've learned. Just get over it and get going. So I've learned, Palak, over the years that there will be setbacks, but I don't take it personally. And every day is a new day. I wake up with enthusiasm for the day, looking to see what I can conquer and leave the past behind. There's no other way to do it. I can wallow in self pity, I can keep playing the incidents in my mind and feel bad for myself, but that's not going to help anyone. So I think you have to sit with it. You have to think about what you could have done differently, what the incident is teaching you. But then after 24 hours or 48 hours at the very most, you've got to move on. It's about soldiering on, it's about the strength, the resilience to carry on without allowing the weight of that rejection to weigh down on you.
I'm going to ask you about this little segment that you have in your book, which is titled "Be a Love Cat." And what does this term mean for, and can you explain it for the readers or viewers?
Yeah, so actually, if, yeah, you remember from the book, it is a term out there which is an important reminder to us that you have to be very generous. I would say Love Cat is about generosity. It's about giving your time, giving your energy, giving your knowledge to others. We shouldn't be hoarders. We live in a knowledge economy, but just because you know something, it doesn't mean you have an advantage. Share it freely. So, a love cat is somebody in the workplace who is extremely generous with all of these resources and is always looking at how can I help the other person, either with my time, my energy, my resources, or my knowledge. And I believe when you do that, you become very powerful. You become somebody who people seek for advice, for mentorship, for connections, and that makes your brand stronger. It helps you stand out because most people are busy only helping themselves. So be a love cat, embrace love. And more than being generous, it's also about your kindness. It's about just that very warm approach that you take to the workplace. The workplace doesn't have to be cold, it doesn't have to be formal. Now, of course, depending on the workplace, you can't be hugging and kissing everyone, but metaphorically, the warmth that you give, the aura that is around you should be all about exuding that love, respect, kindness for others, and the ability to help them.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. And so this is a lot about giving, like the bringing in the warmth, giving, and what about the opposite spectrum? Like, we struggle a lot with asking. And how do you propose we go about asking, and what is the right way to ask for anything that you want from anyone else in the corporate sector?
You just have to start practicing it, Palak. There's nothing more of a secret to that, right? You ask, you get. You may not immediately get, but keep practicing. So you might practice by asking your parents if you want to do something, or your spouse if you want to go out. And in my book, I've detailed a lot of strategies for how you can ask and get anything that you want. Of course, I'm portraying it as much easier than it is. But I think going back to Elizabeth Gilbert, we don't ask because we're shy of rejection. We don't ask because we worry about what people will think if, you ask. But asking is a form of communication. It's about telling the other person, this is important for me. Do you understand? It's important for me. How can we make it work? And of course, when I say ask, don't be ridiculous about asking for the most expensive car, asking for the biggest raise that you can ever get, but asking for your needs to be met, asking for the other person to truly understand you, asking for opportunities, asking to be better valued. These are all things that we should practice, because we have to be self advocates. Asking is very intrinsically linked to self advocacy. Nobody else is going to advocate for you. You need to do that. And for that, you need to be a good asker. So start asking questions, practice. Of course, there'll be rejections, learn to deal with it, get going again, and you'll be better. Which is why I say sales is an amazing profession because it teaches you so much. And actually, people look down upon sales. If you're in marketing or strategy, you think sales is all rubbish. It's, for people who are not so smart. But actually, sales is something that everybody needs to have because it's persuasion, it's asking and getting.
That's wonderful. So what are the other some self-limiting beliefs that that we tend to have, and how do you kind of propose we go about countering them?
A lot of self work, Palak, because especially young women feel I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not capable enough, I don't deserve this. Even very senior women have an imposter syndrome. People who are promoted into CEO positions or selected, secretly they may wonder, do I deserve to be there? Do I have the capabilities to do this job? Yes, you do.
Doubting
Stop
her.
you're doubting yourself and those self-limiting beliefs. That only comes from affirmations or working on yourself and building up a very, very healthy dose of confidence and self-belief. A lot of young women get it from sport. I have two daughters. They both play football and they've been very active in high school. And I can see how much confidence is built up from sports. And so, a team sport where you learn to collaborate, where you learn that you're a valuable member of a team, I think those are some amazing avenues to build up confidence. Even if you're a young woman at the workplace, maybe you can join a sports league or join a community, involve yourself with others you then realize how much value you have to add, and that builds confidence. Very often, if you're just lonely by yourself, going to work, going back home, and just grinding, there may not be an opportunity to build that confidence. So, building confidence, believing in yourself, that's super important. I mean, look at Kamala Harris, where she's come from where to where, and so much of that is a healthy dose of self belief and believing that you can.
That's really helpful. And moving a little bit towards like how you mentioned, like in your 9 to 5 job, you may get drained, and like you're doing the same repetitive, monotonous routine life you're living. So how do you, like let's focus a little bit on balancing energy that you've spoken about in the book as well. And if you could mention a little bit about how do you help us understand what are energy drainers and what are energy givers, and how to kind of balance your life accordingly.
What a fantastic question. I do think managing your energy is one of the keys to success. Energy givers are very much mind, body, soul related. Exercise, nutrition, reflection, journaling, gratitude, friendships, relationships, being outdoors, getting the sun, breathing, even hydration. These are all practices that give you energy. On the other hand, Palak, a lot of digital screen time, sitting in one place, indulging in gossip, bringing people down, a toxic workplace. These are all energy drainers. And as we go through our lives, as we go through our day, there will be the energy givers and the energy drainers. And you just have to be constantly self aware and make sure that you have more energy givers and that you have enough of those things that you're doing that give you energy to be able to just negate any other negative energy that's coming your way. So, managing that balance is critical. And I'm a huge believer in exercise and nutrition and good sleep, because all of these things allow you to have that positive spirit and the stamina to go through all day.
Wonderful. And as we have spoken a little bit about balance, and there is this one line in your book, and I quoted, like, unhappiness at home carries through into the workplace and vice versa. And this was particularly insightful for me. And if you could just talk a little bit more about like how we can end the segment with, like how to not be stuck in this loop of unhappiness, and to figure out life. So that's something, if you could go ahead.
That's quite a deep one because I'm not a psychologist, but I can share with you from my own experience that work and life are interconnected. I've tried to keep them apart. I try to think about work at work and think about home at home, but they are interconnected. The mind, body, soul is interconnected. And if something's bothering you at home, it's very difficult to leave that behind. So it's really important, Palak, that in every aspect of your life, you have to make sure that there's balance. So at home, for example, if things are imbalanced and you've neglected your children or neglected your relationship with your spouse, you have to be self aware to know that that's happening, and perhaps that's the source of your unhappiness. And you have to make an effort to change that. Some women, unfortunately, are abused physically, emotionally, and it can be extremely difficult. The first port of call then is to ask for help, to reach out. There are so many helplines today where people can help, and then you have to have the courage to be able to get out of negative situations. There are women that I've mentored where we can't even come to professional issues because the personal issues are weighing them down so much. And that's when I've helped with interventions of counselors, helped people really get out of negative situations. And it's not always easy because sometimes women themselves, while they are unhappy, they don't want to make too much change. But you have to recognize that if something is broken at home, it will carry on and it will hold you back at the workplace. Some women are good at keeping things separate, but eventually it does catch up. Equally, Palak, if you're very stressed at work, you have a boss who you don't get along with, or you have a toxic relationship with a worker, that's going to carry over to how you show up for your kids, your spouse, your parents at home. So it's really important to then sort it out, to not allow the negativity at work to continue. Again, you have to have the courage to speak up, to have that confrontation, to solve the issues rather than just shoving it under the carpet and imagine that life will trundle on. I was one of those people who shoved things under the carpet and it catches up with you. 5 years later, 10 years later, just pretend everything is okay. Any difficult conversation, you avoid it. But it catches up with you. It also takes a toll on your body. A lot of times when you speak to a counselor, they'll just ask you to close your eyes and ask you where in your body you're feeling that pain. And they can identify the emotional triggers for that physical pain. So you see, it's very, very interrelated. A lot of self care is important. It sounds very new age, Balak, but it's important. I think, especially women, we give so much of ourselves to others, to our workplaces, to our spouses, to our children. We don't take care of ourselves enough. Actually, there's another book that I reference in my book called The Three Marriages. And it's about your marriage with your spouse, of course. That's the traditional definition of marriage. There's a marriage with work, and then there's the marriage with yourself. And it's the marriage with yourself that we neglect very often. But if we pay attention to that, many other things will take care of itself.
That's very wholesome, and I think the insights that you're given, how to kind of go about solving for all of these issues that women leaders may feel, whether it is self-limiting beliefs, whether it is like expanding their network. I think very a lot of practical tips there. Thank you so much for all of this. Is there, if there's anything else that you want to add on to the conversation or give like an advice that to end the session, you can go ahead with that, and then we
I
close.
think the most important thing, Palak, for young women and anyone actually to remember is that you have more power than you think. Don't give away that power to an organization or to other people. Tap into it, understand what it is, and use that to achieve what it is you want. Because when you actively know your strengths and shape your story, you can shape your destiny. That would be my one big thing that I would tell people. Don't ever forget the power that you have, which is yourself.
That's such a powerful note to end on, and I think this conversation has been really great. I learned a lot beyond the book as well, and I hope everybody who's tuned into this channel also got a lot of practical insights on how to move forward. Thank you so much, Lulu, for your time, and thank you so much for being on eShe TV.
Thank you so much, Palak. It was so lovely to chat with you. Really appreciate that you went through the book and you had such wonderful, thoughtful questions. So, very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.